Roadkill is a character in Twisted Metal that is typically associated with being the good guy, having plentiful amounts of iterations. Some aid in building the Kane family storyline, others just don't. Today, we are going to look at every Roadkill from the Twisted Metal series. Before we begin, Roadkill does not appear in every entry, so the games that will be skipped out on is Twisted Metal 4 and Small Brawl. Also, I will not be talking about Minion in Twisted Metal Black, who has Marcus Kane driving that, because that's not Roadkill. So with that out of the way, we will go right into the very first Twisted Metal. 1995 is where Roadkill appeared for the very first time in this game. It's a shocker, I know, being driven by Captain Spears, one of the few times Roadkill has a driver that is not Marcus Kane. Captain Spears has a Twisted Metal story that's as old as time. He's competing for the ability to go back to a moment in history where he's able to save a squad under his command that he led into a trap where they all perished. He is not a good captain, so that needs to be changed, and to pull this off, he decided to compete in a vehicle made of trash. You'd figure it would be something more akin to an automobile used by the military, but no, it's labeled as junk car, which sounds awful on paper, but it's actually far from that. Roadkill is arguably the best character in the first Twisted Metal, having great armor and speed with a serviceable special weapon. The game does say his handling is only 2 stars, but it feels more like 4. You're able to maneuver very well with Roadkill while going very fast for a heavily armored vehicle, to the point where I started to question the design of this character. Heavily armored vehicles are supposed to be very sluggish, like Darkseid, Hammerhead, and Sweet Tooth. Then we have Roadkill over here, who handles like a middling armored car with the capabilities of heavily armored ones, able to deal a ton of ramming damage to most enemies, creating a very strange situation in the balance department. I never found a playthrough with Roadkill remotely close to difficult. It feels as if the ball is always in the player's court. Any aspect you'd assume to be weak just isn't. It's almost impossible to find a single flaw with this character. Regardless of your skill level, you will eventually tear your way through everyone in this game to reach Minion, or the Mind Tank if you will, killing him to reach your credit crawl ending, which is boring, so I'm going to use the FMV cutscene instead. We get to see our stupendous driver wish to go back in time, where Calypso ominously warns him it won't go the way he expects. Captain Spears does not listen to this. Those men need to be saved so badly. He is then transported in the middle of the woods, proceeding to tell his squad to not move and wait for further orders. Then an opposing soldier comes to blow Captain Spears away. Presumably his squad is safe, but he ended up dying. It's a very simple story. I think David Jaffe loved this setup a ton as well, because this premise got reused 2 more times in this series, with Outlaw and Twisted Metal Black, then Mr. Grimm in Twisted Metal 2012. I feel like this works for a story in this franchise, giving off the essence of what one of these endings is supposed to be. The contestant is wishing for something that's honestly righteous and respectable, going back to undo his wrongs, then just has it twisted around by Calypso to kill him off. If anyone asked to summarize a Twisted Metal ending, I would probably use this one. Overall, the first iteration of Roadkill was quite powerful from a gameplay perspective. I would say the best playable character in this game. I just think he's broken. Also having a decent setup for a story. There's just not really much to complain about here. But after these days of Captain Spears was over, Roadkill was changed into his final form. Twisted Metal 2 introduced us to what most know Roadkill as, Marcus Kane, the 3rd addition to the Kane family, completely removing the Captain Spears driver to give us a "welcome to the family, son" moment. First we had Needles and Charlie Kane from the previous game. Now we got Needles Kane, Marcus Kane, and Charlie Kane, who's driving Darktooth. Marcus is taking on the appearance of a homeless man, weirdly enough still keeping the essence of the previous driver with the vehicle, because he's driving a shitbox. This time it is reddish orange instead of gray metal bits hashed together. To me, I think this is the best way to portray Roadkill, just having it be a car that looks like it came out of the dump. When it comes to the personality of Marcus Kane, we entered the realm of a character trying to break the 4th wall. Very similar to Needles Kane, which I just realized, but Marcus Kane is letting the player know nothing here is right. He's trying to make fun of you, which he can do that all he wants, but all I gotta do is just load in, not press a button, and let him die on repeat if I really wanted to, so he shouldn't be throwing stones from a glass house. He claims everyone thinks he's crazy, but you'll find out how sane he actually is when you finish his tournament. Some may bite down on this cookie after reading this and want to see what our homeless friend is talking about. I've been to New York before, I've seen this song and dance, so we'll see if it's any different this time. When we load in, you'll realize Roadkill is much different than what we played as in the previous title. You do have a similar speed and handling. His armor was just reduced a ton in comparison, making him a much different experience compared to the disaster we talked about before. You cannot go around ramming people, instead primarily utilizing his ability to be agile. After realizing this, you'll probably test his special weapon out and see that it's a piece of shit, which may have you questioning your sanity rather than Marcus Kane here, until you go spelunking through the ancient tombs and find out there's actually a small gimmick to the special weapon and this bad damage you're seeing is not the whole story. You're shooting out a boomerang here, which will return to you if it misses an opponent. Just shooting it at someone normally does abhorrent damage, but if you let the rang fly back and hit someone on return, you realize the damage you're dealing is doubled, creating a very interesting dynamic. If you're able to pull this off, the special damage goes from barely anything to something a player could call a real special weapon. I love the idea. My only problem is how awkward doing this can be sometimes. Lining up the boomerang shot to hit on return just doesn't work as you'd expect. I don't feel like the trajectory of the boomerang is clear to the player. You can shoot it and sometimes the arc will be smaller, sometimes it will be wider, and then other times it just turns for literally no reason and hits a tree. I feel like if the player was able to recall the boomerang on their own timing instead of relying on this, Roadkill would probably be one of the best characters in the game because the damage is really good here. Unfortunately, you need to put up with the janky hogwash. Plus, in Twisted Metal 2, the AI won't really let you have time to set this up, which made me barely ever use the return boomerang for extra damage. Outside of the unique gimmick, I never felt like there was anything really gripping about Roadkill in Twisted Metal 2, especially compared to the last iteration where he was a mess. Here, you feel like you're playing a worse version of like Outlaw or Spectre, someone in that category. He's just a fine character, nothing too special or too fun, honestly. After slaughtering your brother, dad, whatever Needles' relationship is to Marcus in this title, we kill our grandfather at the end of the tournament, basically ending the entire Kane family tree, visiting Calypso to yell in his face about how this whole contest is fake, wishing to wake up and be out of this nightmare. And yeah, I can understand how someone would think this is not real. The second you see Darktooth, you should assume that you're in a nightmare. Just do the Divergent shit I say and get out of it. Calypso reassures Marcus how he was the smartest boy in the room. We see him wake up, laying in a hospital bed. Someone must have hoped all of these people's families would die in an automobile wreck because it appears that actually happened. The automobile wreck was even stated by Calypso himself.
Good God, son, you're alive! Or you were in a 25-car pileup on the freeway. It's a wonder you've come back to us at all. The rest are still in comas.
As the camera pans out, we can see the other playable drivers as they are all stuck in the nightmare eternally, with the cutscene coming to a close. I think taking this path for a story in this series is honestly a nice one. I'm not going to pretend it's stupendous storytelling and the most in-depth experience since sliced bread, but it's a better story than the Borderlands movie, so I guess that counts. That whole thing costed $150 million, and Roadkill's story costed nowhere close to that, so it's a win if you look at it that way. After fully going back and looking at this iteration of Roadkill, I'm still not entirely sure how to feel about it. I really do enjoy some aspects, and then I stop and think how, like, gameplay-wise, I enjoyed Twisted Metal 1 Roadkill more, and if I look at the story, I would rather have the Twisted Metal head-on Roadkill, being in a weird position overall. This Roadkill's kind of forgettable to me, but we have like 1,000 other Roadkills to look at, so we must move on. Twisted Metal 3 brought Roadkill back as Marcus Kane once again, still looking like a homeless man, shouting out nonsense in his bio, and thankfully it's voice acted so we can get a little taste of this.
I'm channeling a transmission from the mothership, Dr. Area 51. The bald-headed friendlies tell me I'll win the Twisted Metal tournament, even though I'm an evil-smelling wacko. I'm not begging for this victory. I'm earning it.
Thankfully, with the studio change, 989 still kept the aesthetic of the junk car, looking very similar to Twisted Metal 1. I'm a big fan of this vehicle. I think it looks really nice. Where after seeing all of this in the character selection screen, you're gonna be prepared to witness a truly enthralling adventure right after pressing the X button. Initially, when you start up your game, the special may be confusing to some, shooting out the forbidden explosive ninja star, also used by Primeval, being much better with him obviously, but with Roadkill, you're launching it out similar to a napalm, where it kind of sucks doing that. Hitting people just won't happen unless you freeze them and set it up, or you somehow get lucky and get a direct hit. I'm sure a lot of people would immediately be filled with disappointment and think this special sucks, because I know I did. Very similar to Twisted Metal 2, there's a tactic that makes this special weapon work and deal a pretty good amount of damage. Instead of activating it from a distance, you ram into someone or get really close to them and then shoot it. That way damage is guaranteed. This is obviously much easier to pull off than Twisted Metal 2. There's no wonky angles you need to deal with. All you gotta do is drive up to someone and press a button. I'm not sitting here pulling out the TI-83 and doing calculations to where my ninja star is gonna go, allowing this to be a lot more player friendly than Twisted Metal 2. This Roadkill, once again, is equipped with serviceable armor, speed, and handling, creating an unexpectedly decent character overall. I found he's also one of the few characters that don't have too many issues with physics, creating yet another positive for him. Your overall playthrough, on normal at least, will be a pretty easy one. I'm playing on pure lunacy here, so all I'm dealing with is the AI getting their health back at any moment it spawns in, or rear spamming me every chance they get, sending me to the underworld. Pure lunacy is just rough in this game. After going through all this, dealing with Primeval and his hogwash, we enter Shreklipso's blimp. Marcus wishes to spend the rest of his days in the Pines, where we then see he has a midlife crisis, dyes his hair blonde. It's that, or he attached ramen noodles to his head. Finding out the Pines is actually a ward rather than wherever he thought it was. I'm not entirely sure what to say about this, but thankfully Marcus is dancing in joy within his new home. This is a very quick rundown. There's not really much to say. We can't say anything about the story department because, again, what are you even supposed to say about that? This is purely a gameplay one where he's honestly not that bad. After gripping with the idea of using his special very close to an enemy, you'll realize serviceable amounts of damage can be done. Alongside the good armor, handling, and speed, you got a pretty decent character here. If you haven't given him a try before, I would definitely recommend it. Twisted Metal Black enters us into a whole new world of fun, mainly with Roadkill, this time being driven by John Doe, Jonathan, John, whichever name you'd like to call him. Most wouldn't really know what to make of this character at first. That term is typically used for an unidentified deceased victim, but he's clearly alive driving the automobile, so we press the big X button on the controller to see what this character is all about. John is standing up straight, staring out the little window they gave him in his clubhouse, monologuing about how he has no idea who he is, talking about his tattoos, confused about the whole situation, until Calypso struts in, informing John if he competes in the contest and wins, he will be able to find out who he is. Which you'd assume John would figure that out when he was getting apprehended in the first place, like maybe the cops or whoever captured him would have been able to do something to find out his identity, but sure, we're not talking about a dead person here. Calypso lets him out of jail, which is pretty unfortunate for all the other contestants because Roadkill is pretty overpowered. His speed and handling is above average, letting you skate around the level to your heart's content. The armor is fine, I would say in the average range, allowing the player to be somewhat aggressive during their session. And then we reach the special weapon, which does get talked about a lot, but that's for a reason. The special weapon is really, really good. I'm sure when people played for the very first time, they probably thought all they could do was shoot one missile out since they just pressed the button once. But if they held it down, it charges up the ability to shoot out an entire barrage, dealing a large chunk of damage to an opponent. This helps a lot to keep in the back pocket. Weaker enemies get eaten alive by this thing. It also helps you during boss battles. On the first boss, Minion, you can typically break a panel right off the rip by shooting his special weapon when the level begins. then after breaking his shield, you can melt him even faster than a lot of other characters in this game. After pulling that off, the gas tanker explodes, and miraculously a piece of it hits your windshield. Your character is sitting in the automobile with 0 damage done to it. We see John, after overdosing on sleeping medication, dreaming about the gang, talking about how they were nobodies, beating people up, or performing small crimes, wanting to set a bomb inside of a building to unleash a chemical chaos amongst the entirety of civilization, so they can become feared and the most frightening group on this side of Kmart. John then wakes up very sad of the memories that are being triggered, where I think the enemies that go against him in the next level are more sad than he ever will be. He is not locked inside the ship with them, they are locked inside the ship with him. Where the rest of your playthrough should be smooth sailing, Roadkill is powerful enough to tear through everyone. Warhawk is a very easy character to defeat with Roadkill, and after doing so, we are able to witness the closing of John's story, giving us some of the most unintentionally funny things in history. He pulls into wherever this location is, Calypso's humble abode, I guess. John asks, "Who am I?" Calypso throws a wallet at him, unveiling who he actually is. FBI, undercover, trying to bust the Doomsday Cult, as he calls it. John rushed back into the building where he originally put the bomb. He took the bomb out and then throws it into the world, giving us this smile, which I don't think was intended to be as funny as it is. Then him being shocked, which falls into the same vein. He finally realizes he is standing in front of the number 2 on the FBI's most wanted list, where he proceeds to fall over and drop his Crayola paint on the floor. A little part of me is kind of confused while watching this, because when I see it, I don't really understand why he goes inside the building and then returns to Calypso afterwards. Like, did he teleport? Was Calypso just sitting there waiting for him to return? Was that part of the wish? There was just no reason for him to come back here. John could have gotten his wish and just been on his merry way. On top of this, did it not occur to him for a single minute that Calypso would be wanted, or that he would probably not want to associate himself with the police? He's running a tournament where a bunch of people are dying. Right when he figured out that he was a cop, he should have busted his ass out of there. It's just one of those stories to me where using logic just kind of destroys it, but at least I got the smile picture out of it, so I'm happy. I still do think Roadkill and Twisted Metal Black is a good experience overall. From a pure gameplay standpoint, you have a very powerful character, arguably the best out of the entire roster, good in almost every department. I would say aesthetically, this car is kind of boring. I've never been a fan of it. Even the older junk cars in the PS1, they still looked a bit more pleasing than this iteration. From a story perspective, like, it's fine, I guess. I kind of just like to pick fun at this one because of the faces I got from it. Looking at it seriously is just kind of hard for me. It's just an okay story, and thankfully, that is about to change. Twisted Metal Head On would be the next title we see Roadkill return, being in the same universe as Twisted Metal 2. Lots of the characters have sequel stories, if you will, to their previous iterations, where Roadkill is once again Marcus Kane, changing up the whole situation of who he actually is, which we will talk about in his ending. But before this, we need to go through his tournament, feeling very similar to Twisted Metal 2, having the same exact special weapon as well. Granted, I like the car model in Twisted 2 more than here, but whatever. Thankfully, the functionality of his special was actually changed to what I was talking about during that portion of the video. The player is able to do returns with the boomerang on their own timing, which will still grant you that extra damage. All you do is press the special button to launch it, and then press it again whenever you want to recall the attack. I like having the ability to be in the player's hands, allowing for more creativity with how it's used, rather than relying on the game to do it all for you and work around that. Unfortunately, the game it's in is Twisted Metal Head On, so you'll inevitably become so powerful to the point none of this really matters due to upgrades not being balanced properly. His upgraded special weapon turns it into like this shotgun boomerang type thing where you charge it up and then release, where it shoots out a ton of boomerangs. When I look at this special weapon, I don't really feel like the shotgun thing fits it. I feel like a better idea would have been having the player charge it up the same way, but all the small boomerangs create little vortexes similar to Twister's special attack. But unfortunately, we are stuck with the shotgun boomerang is what I'm gonna call it. After going through this tournament, we are blessed with the beginning of what was used in 2012's story with Needles Kane, threading the line of making both Marcus and Needles Kane the same person, essentially being an alter ego. Marcus is the normal sane version, while Needles is the psychotic animalistic version. It's a very interesting way to portray this. In Twisted Metal 2, I'm not fully sure what the relation between Marcus and Needles is, aside from them sharing the last name, and then tossing in Charlie Kane there, that being Darktooth, where we know that's Needles' father. So maybe Marcus is the son or the brother? I'm not entirely sure. Here, I'm glad they decided to create this scenario and help alleviate the confusion. As we talked about with the previous Every Sweet Tooth video, Head On also expands the same situation with the whole Darktooth ending. I still have the same sentiment. I'm not entirely sure what's happening here, but for all the people who want to create theories, I'm sure they've cooked up something. All in all, for Head On Roadkill, the idea of the Kane family being brought closer together, closer than some may think initially, was probably the right move to make. This is the franchise family, so adding more depth to it is always nice and a very gripping thing for players to get invested in. When it comes to gameplay, I'm glad they allowed the player to recall the boomerang whenever they like. Just a shame they did it in this game and not Twisted Metal 2. Twisted Metal 2012 is the next version where we won't spend much time talking about this, unfortunately. It's just a vehicle here, rather than having a driver attached, which is quite disappointing. The model itself is aesthetically pleasing. I'm a fan of the 2012's iteration in that regard. You are required to use Roadkill against the Brothers Grimm boss fight during Sweet Tooth story mode. Sadly, this is just a clone of Death Warrant, having a chain gun primary special weapon with a secondary special being able to shoot blood missiles out. It's cool, I just wish characters didn't share the same exact special weapons because it kind of removes a big part of Twisted Metal that makes me enjoy it. Of course, I'm not as in with Twisted Metal 2012 as some people, so possibly the damage numbers are different. I would just prefer if the specials overall were completely different so the characters didn't feel the same. So now that we have gone over all the iterations of Roadkill, aside from the TV show version, just in case anyone is still in the process of watching it and doesn't want any spoilers to come, I'm not going to talk about it here. It is now time to rank them all from worst to best. Per usual, the ranking is purely on gameplay, since including stories makes everything a lot more difficult. Plus, 2012 doesn't even have a story mode for Roadkill, so it couldn't be included anyways. So let us begin. I decided to put Twisted Metal 2 Roadkill at the bottom, which is disappointing to me since I love the creativity. It's just utilizing this character to the maximum is not really feasible to do most of the time. The return boomerang does deal a lot of damage, but I don't feel like you have the opportunity to set this up. Plus, factoring in how on occasion the boomerang will not even have a consistent trajectory, creating some frustrating moments. Obviously, you handle great with a good speed on top of that, making the functionality a decent experience, but due to the difficulties of maximizing the character's special, I felt like I was stuck using the boomerang regularly, which just sucks for damage. There are just better options in Twisted Metal 2 and also Roadkills overall. Next is Twisted Metal 2012, which unfortunately is a game I don't have the most experience with, so giving it a proper rating is almost impossible for me. Even after spending some extra time, I never felt like this character was blowing my socks off, dealing buckets of damage, or doing anything noteworthy enough to be memorable. Possibly that's due to the fact of Roadkill and Death Warrant essentially being the same character. Surely someone else will have the correct answer for this, but for me, Roadkill didn't have any aura here or resonate with me. Twisted Metal Head On Roadkill, in my opinion, is a fixed version of Twisted Metal 2's iteration, keeping the trend of good control, speed, and handling, allowing the player to not really worry about those fronts. I'm just glad it fixed the biggest problem that I had with Twisted Metal 2 Roadkill, that being allowing the player to recall the boomerang, getting extra damage off on your own accord, alleviating frustrations in that department. Plus, the regular damage without doing the gimmick move is more impactful than Twisted Metal 2. In that game, it feels like you are required to get the hit on return for your special to deal any damage. Regularly, it's just worthless. In Head On, you feel a bit more free to play how you like. If you want to pull off that extra damage, you can, but it's not required. My only issue with putting this character higher on the tier list is the fact we are talking about a head-on character. Finding out who is better than who is practically impossible since almost everyone feels the same outside of a few, so putting him in the mid area feels good enough to me. Originally, Twisted Metal 3 Roadkill made me want to scoop my eyeballs out with a spoon, but he started to grow on me after a little bit. After playing around more, doing some testing, I found Roadkill is much better than I ever anticipated. Of course, he does suffer from a similar issue as Twisted Metal 2 Roadkill, with initially you feel like his special sucks, but at least for this iteration, it's not frustrating to have the special work into your favor. As I said way back when, all you need to do is drive up to a car and press a button. There is no calculations needed. The damage you deal is sufficient enough, on top of having good speed, handling, and average armor, as expected. On top of this, being one of the cars where flipping over won't happen too much creates a scenario for a pretty interesting little automobile here. If you've never tried using Roadkill with the ramming and shoving the special in someone's asshole method, you definitely should. The character will be a much better experience. Next is Twisted Metal Black Roadkill. Jonathan is just a disaster. The special is a mess, doing so much damage, requiring barely any input from the player. Just hold the button and let go. Once again, having the same positives as all the other Roadkills. They really did stick with the same outline, good handling, speed, and middling armor. This guy is just baby's first character in Black. Anyone who's never touched this game, playing Roadkill is the instant recommendation for understanding how this game works. Plus, not having to fight him throughout your tournament mode is a massive positive, since he is right next to Raven as the most irritating and damaging AI. There's not really much else to say that hasn't been said a million times. This iteration of Roadkill is buckets of fun to experience, and I'm sure anyone, regardless of skill level, will have a good time with him. And finally, I decided to stick Roadkill from Twisted Metal 1 as the best. The more I played this character, it was really hard for me to ever say Warthog is the best, like a lot of other people like to tout. You feel like all your stats are top tier, nothing can ever stop this power. Your special is sufficient enough. It's probably the weakest aspect of Roadkill here, but it's still stronger than most others on the roster. Plus, ramming feels as if it's Twisted Metal 1's true special weapon anyways, which Roadkill is more than capable of doing. When pitting this against Twisted Metal Black Roadkill to see who would go in the #1 spot, it honestly came down to the fact of how Roadkill and Black has competition. Crazy 8 and Shadow are not too far behind him, and Twisted Metal 1, Roadkill's only competition is Warthog, and even still, the more I play, the more I feel that gap gets larger and larger. So it made it really difficult to put anyone aside from Twisted Metal 1 Roadkill as the best Roadkill in the franchise. And with that, this is every Roadkill in Twisted Metal history with my respective rankings. Seeing how the characters have evolved over the franchise's tenure is always interesting to witness. Design differences, special changes, switching up how the driver is overall. It's always a long, long road. This time I tried to cut down on the overall runtime of the video in comparison to my every Sweet Tooth video. Still trying to figure out how I want to set these videos up, but I'm sure the kinks will work themselves out as we go. As always, make sure to leave your rankings of each Roadkill and your thoughts for your favorite Roadkill in the franchise in the comments below.